For this week's still life, I am starting with a textured background. I created this background in Photoshop. What I ended up doing is I scanned a piece of kind of very unique canvas, and then I was able to take that canvas, paint white around the edges, so that then I can make a large brush from it, and then using a variety of colors kind of brush this texture in as a background. Give myself a little bit more of an interesting background as I get started on this stuffed animal project. So I'm going to go ahead and start just do some basic drawing on this stuffed animal character. And as you see, I'm just kind of making some marks, some denotations of some key points. The back of the rump area, it's got a really unique muzzle area. I'm going to pay attention to the shape of that and put that in there. And I'm just kind of go back and forth and just start to build up, just like you would with any other drawing. Again, I'm making sure that this drawing is the topmost layer of my Photoshop file. You can see I've got the many layers over there on the right. So I want to make sure it's that topmost layer as I'm working. That way, when I go to paint this object, I can just paint right underneath it. To the right, you'll notice that I have a variety of grays that I'm creating. These gray colors are going to be useful. My object is actually white, but we can't really paint it a pure white. The whitest white of my painting is going to be the topmost highlights. And so I have to come up with some very unique grays in order to render this object and to paint it correctly. My next step is to start pulling out some of my white areas. Since my background is kind of a mid-tone area, I like to start by pulling out some of those white areas so that my figure can immediately start to take some form. Now again, I'm not using a pure white, so I'm creating a mixture of kind of a warm light gray and a kind of a cool light gray, and kind of interplaying the two together to create kind of a unique effect in the light area. I make sure I separate the light area from the dark area as I'm painting. And I'll continue to add white very roughly. I'm just blocking in the light area. I'm not focusing too much on the detail right now. Just kind of basically putting in some of those light areas, paying attention to where the shadow is falling and the shadow side of the object, and trying to render that as a shape area. And then to continue to pull some different unique colors of my light grays in order to vary the white area, give it some interest. Now I'm going to start putting in some of the shadow area. You'll notice I haven't completely finished filling in all the white areas yet, but I want to need to kind of know where my shadow area is and my light area is, so I'll kind of go back and forth between the two, sampling colors as they go along. Remember, just hold down Option if you're using a Mac, or Alt if you're using a PC, in order to sample those colors and to access that eyedropper tool. And so I can just continue to put in some of those colors, paying attention to my object. Not all shadows are the same, so some of my shadows are lighter, some of my shadows are darker. Some of that reflective light is coming back into the belly area. It's giving them a much lighter shadow color. And it's also adding to the bluish nature of that shadow color. So I'll make sure that I pay attention to that and I render it properly. Again, at this point, we're not focusing too much on the detail. We want to get the basic shape areas in first. Yes, this is a fuzzy object. Yes, it has fur, and it's got some nice some yarn for the hair and stuff like that. And we'll get to that later, but right now we're just focusing on the light areas and the dark areas, putting in what areas are light, putting in what areas are dark. The unique thing about Photoshop is that you can continue to work on top of your painting over and over, build, take away, erase, build back into it, and you won't scrape up your canvas, you won't ruin anything. You can just keep on working back and forth. So that's what we'll do. We'll just put in those light areas, put in those dark areas, and we'll worry about the edge quality a little bit later. So as I continue to work into this, I'll continue to refine the shadow shapes in order so that they reflect what it is that's actually being cast upon them, or what they are actually casting. Starting with a large shape and working into a smaller shape. The secret to creating and rendering fur really lies in the edge quality. An object that is shiny is going to have a much stronger edge. An object that is got a fur or fuzzy patina is going to have a softer edge. And so I'm going to utilize a little bit softer brush as I build up this painting, as I render it. Also, you'll notice that I do start to make some indications of fur direction. Pay attention to the direction that fur is going, and as you paint with your brush, try to paint in that same direction. And that will give the indication that there's a fur quality of fuzziness that's occurring with the surface area. The idea is you're not trying to recreate every single little strand of hair or fur that's on your object. That would take you forever and would make things very crazy. Instead, you want to give the indication of fur. And a lot of times fur and hair will lump together in clumps and in groups. And you can paint those as a single brush stroke and make an indication that this is a group of fur going one direction, and paint that direction and paint that in that way. And then you'll also notice that I've got these small strokes, and the smaller strokes represent the shorter quality of the fur. For perhaps a longer stroke area, as you'll see as we go down to the ankle area of the horse, you'll see that I'll make some broader, wider, longer strokes in order to indicate longer fur area. Now as I continue to work into this, I'm noticing that my top sketch layer is starting to obscure some of the painting, and I'm having a hard time distinguishing what's my sketch layer and what's my painting layer. And so what I'll do is, as I build up my painting, I can go into my topmost layer, my sketch layer, and start to erase some of that sketch, so that way I have just my painting revealed underneath. And that way those sketch lines no longer obscure the area that I'm working in. Now I'm going to come down here and start working on the ankle areas. These ankles have some really nice fuzzy ringlets around them that I really want to observe and paint in there correctly. One of the things to remember that even though it's hair, hair has a shadow area. There is a definite shadow and light area in the soft hair and the soft fur as well. So I want to try to find and pick a nice shadow color for the fur and shadow area and paint that in. And I want to pay attention to the overall shape areas. Again, if I squint my eyes, I can see that I've got some triangulation going on as that hair crosses over one from another and forms a shadow underneath. And so I'll put that in there. And then I can put the lighter fur on top, the fur that's being hit by the light. Again, I'm not going to put in 100% white at this point. I'll save the white for the very end to pull out those final bit of highlight areas. Hair and fur also casts its own shadow. As you'll notice on the foot underneath this ringlet area, I'm showing where the shadow has been cast by the fur above it. So that's again something that you'll want to pay attention to and you'll want to render. If you've got long hair coming off of your toy or your object, what is the light direction and what is the shadow that hair or fur is casting upon other objects of your toy or stuffed animal. Because this fur around the ankle is kind of wispy in nature, I can achieve this by going back and forth between background color and foreground color, cutting into the negative space area of that fur, and then painting back over with that fur back on top of that, kind of an interplay of that back and forth until I get the wispy nature and the wispy quality that I'm looking for. Now we get to come to the fun part, add in some of those highlight areas. I'll start by putting in a nice bright highlight, and then I'll I'll soften the edges around it because again, this is wispy hair, wispy fur. But I get to sample some of that really nice light color and put it in there as a good highlight. And that's really what makes it pop at the very end. But I save that till the very end. So that way I don't overwhelm my whole piece by painting it white. But my white is very strategic in where it's being placed. So now I'm going to work on the mane area. The mane area is comprised of a number of individual strands of yarn. And again, this could become overwhelming if I try to paint each one of those strands one at a time. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to squint and I'm going to look at my shadow area. I'm going to look at my light area. I'm going to paint the shadow area as one full unit. Put that in there as one solid color. And then I'll do the same with the light area. And then from that I'll be able to work in the shadow area, work in the light area in order to pull out some of the individual strands without having to paint each one at a time separately. And then this will give the sense and the feel of a head full of strings of yarn without having to go through the entire process of painting every single strand of yarn. You'll notice that I put a ground area, I darkened the ground. Normally I would put a cast shadow. In this particular case, I started to put the cast shadow in and I picked this kind of flimsy hair-like brush and I actually kind of liked what it looked like. And so instead of a cast shadow, it's just kind of a darker ground area. It helps the objects pop a little bit more as it sits against that bottom ground. Kind of helps anchor the piece visually. So I'll continue to work in this yarn area, and you'll notice that I'll just continue to start big, start broad. Look for those big shape areas. Look for those areas first. If you squint your eyes, what do you see? You won't see individual strands. You'll see kind of large clumps of shape areas, color areas. Put those in. Now I'm putting in the light area of the yarn. The yarn is a different color than the horse. It's more of a gray, although there are some strands of white yarn. But I'm going to start with just the gray strands at first, and I can go back in later and pull out some of those white strands of yarn. As you can see, I've created some lines that define some of the darker areas as that yarn kind of overlaps each other. And right now these lines are just a little bit too defined. The yarn's got a softer quality, so I'll go back in there and I'll soften that up a little bit. We're coming to a point where we're starting to wrap this up, putting in some of those light yarn areas. It's starting to get a lot of fun. This is the part of the painting that gets exciting when you get to work on some of that detail. And I'll zoom in and out just to see where we're at, see if it's looking okay. If it looks great from far away, it's probably going to look great up close too. So it helps me get perspective on where I'm at, what I need to change. I've noticed that over here where I'm working on right now, it's gotten a little light on me, so I'll go ahead and darken that up a little bit. And then I'll kind of blend into that dark area. Kind of darken underneath where it's casting a shadow. Again, each individual piece of yarn is also casting a shadow, something you have to keep in mind. And I employ a back and forth motion as I'm painting these colors in, which kind of gives an indication of the yarn texture. Again, I don't want to paint every single fiber that makes up the yarn texture, but we definitely want to give that sense, that indication. And we can do that through the way that we apply the paint. And then here is the finished painting.